and welcome to Authentic Self with Calders. If you're new here, my name is Samantha, and I'm the CEO and founder of Calders Self-Care. Now, Calders is a premium self-care company providing you with primarily self-care kits and other options to create an ambiance of relaxation, a space where your mind is at ease and your senses are engaged and your body is robed in quality. Now, the reason for this channel is to create a space where we can come together, unwind, learn, and gain new insights on how we can improve our lives. Now, I know, and you know, taking care of ourselves should be an everyday practice. Sometimes we're not able to. So on this channel, we'll work together to make it one. Now, have you ever found yourself in a prickly situation where you're communicating what you expect from a person, verbally or even non-verbally, through your actions and how you carry yourself, and yet your boundaries are crossed? I've been there, she's been there, he's been there, and today we're going to discuss the top 5 ways to communicate boundaries and ensure that they're respected. Now, before we can move forward, let's make sure we have a shared understanding of what boundaries are. Well, according to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, boundaries are something that indicates or fixes a limit or extent. So in the context of personal boundaries, we know that our boundaries would limit interactions and what we invest in others. This can be physical, can be emotional, intellectual, or even spiritual. So why must we set healthy boundaries? Well, when we set healthy boundaries, we gain a greater sense of who we are as individuals, and it helps to clarify our identity and reinforce positive interactions, and as a result, it will boost our self-esteem. So by reinforcing our boundaries, we avoid burnout, and the reason being is because we're not wrapped up in the idea of people pleasing. Because let's face it, if you don't have boundaries, people will simply run amok in your life, and before you know it, you don't even recognize yourself. So I firmly, personally, believe that every inaction or response has a consequence as well as action. So not having healthy boundaries will bring about negative consequences, and having healthy boundaries will give you the opportunity for growth and development of your character. But we have to acknowledge this first, that ultimately our culture, environment, experiences, and core values will shape our boundaries. So being cognizant of the ways that we've been conditioned to have porous, firm, or rigid boundaries is important to allow for change and growth. But bear in mind that we can fluctuate between the three. That is dependent on the circumstance, but if we're predominantly more one than an equal balance or relatively close to an equal balance, we might need to reassess a few things. So for me, growing up, my boundaries were heavily influenced by my culture. In my culture, respect for elders was everything. Now granted, I still maintain those same values, but I remember as a child, we would always go to my aunt or my uncle's house for a gathering, let it be Thanksgiving or Christmas. And during this specific time, tons of family members that we hadn't seen or didn't know would come by. Now I remember one Christmas, I was walking into my aunt's home and I slowed my pace behind my older brother because I knew what was coming. We could hear the laughter and the chatter of our family just a few feet away. And my long distance family members came to the door to greet us. And once they locked eyes onto us children, we were often met with the, "Oh my gosh, look at you, you're so big, last time I saw you, you were a baby." And as they approached us with arms spread wide, awaiting a warm embrace, a warm hug, in this moment, I felt complete awkwardness and nervousness. It overwhelmed my body. Like I could literally feel a type of weakness just shuddering under my skin. And it felt like any moment I was going to run. But I knew that a warm embrace was expected. And I did not want to get a talking to about being disrespectful if one had not been given. So with reluctance and a forced smile on my face, I obliged and I hugged the family member. Now, as a result of consistent external factors reinforcing my boundaries, I grew up to have porous ones. I struggled to say no more times than not and felt guilty when I did. But with time and being cognizant of this, I was able to challenge my patterns and begin to rewire them. Because now I know what my rights are. So, what are our rights? What are your rights? First, no is a complete sentence, and you do not have to feel guilty about saying no. It reminds me of a quote when I was in college. I struggled with a little bit of anxiety, but it was from Eleanor Roosevelt, and it said, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." We have the power to be unapologetic and guilt-free, but often we care about what others think or feel about our impact of our words, without ever letting it sink in that that part of the equation is none of our business. Protecting our boundaries and believing that they are valid is sufficient. Now, secondly, what we need to do is make sure that your need is just as important as theirs. So make your need just as important as theirs. So going back to the example I gave you of the family member, when they saw me, all they could see was a baby from long ago, the chubby cheeks, the baby laugh, the innocence. But what they had not taken into consideration was that I was no longer that person. And as young as I was, I had a mind of my own. Now, there was no consideration for me, but an understanding of a shared culture and undertones of that culture. So my boundaries and my needs weren't important then, but they were important. They were important then as they are today, and it's for me to respectfully reinforce with grace. Now, thirdly, you have the right to be treated with respect. When we communicate our boundaries and they are deliberately and repeatedly dishonored, you have the right to yourself to move away from around that person or environment. Now, understandably, it doesn't always work out that way, but if you find yourself in a situation where you're not able to do that, set limits. Set limits to your interactions, set limits to your discussions as much as possible. And by doing this, you are still able to establish healthy boundaries while maintaining your peace of mind. Now, lastly, you have a right to be accepting of your mistakes and failures, or as I like to call them, lessons. We aren't perfect. No one is. And we will make mistakes. However, you should not be penalized for your humanity. Within reason, of course, we're not trying to harm people, especially causing bodily harm, but we have to have grace for ourselves. So keep these rights in mind the next time that your boundaries are challenged and you're faced with the option of either reinforcing or retreating. Okay? So how do we communicate boundaries, healthy boundaries? Tip 1, aside from our rights, tip 1, be assertive. A good example of being assertive is you get me upset when you open my notebook without having asked first. My privacy is important to me, and I would appreciate if you did not go through my things. Instead, ask me first going forward. A bad example, what are you doing? That's my book. Who told you you can go through my stuff? No. That doesn't produce anything other than reinforce anger and defensive. In the first example, we clearly established our discontentment with their action. We acknowledged that privacy was a boundary of ours and made clear expectations going forward. In the second example, like I stated earlier, we're not accomplishing anything. You're just adding more fuel to the fire and you're not stating what your expectations are. Tip number 2, be warm. Being warm in your delivery will improve the receptiveness of the person listening to you to receive and implement a change should they have not intentionally crossed a boundary of yours. Tip 3, don't criticize. Criticism is the worst. It is an attack on a person's character, and it will have the person that you're talking to become defensive and ready to strike back, and nobody needs a fight. So keep in mind, criticism accomplishes nothing short of making the problem larger than what it needs to be. So instead, use I statements when communicating boundaries. This way, you can take ownership of what you're experiencing and what you would like to see going forward. So in your message, make sure that you are clear, direct, and focused on the heart of what you need to communicate. Tip number 4, going back to what I had stated earlier, you want to remove yourself from the environment or from the person if they have no regard for your needs or respect for you as an individual. Tip number 5, and I have to say probably the most important one, is to establish clear expectations. Clearly communicate what your boundaries are and make sure everyone understands what those boundaries are and is accepting of those boundaries. So, in short, there you have it. Those are our insights on boundaries and tips on how to communicate them effectively. So thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you learned a lot and that you can apply some of what you've learned today in your interactions with people in your life on a daily basis. Of course, if you found today's topic impactful, join the tribe and subscribe for future episodes, and share this video with someone who you know or who you believe can grow from learning how to implement and communicate healthy boundaries. Now, I can say we have a few giveaways along with some very impactful topics over the next month. So we're excited to see you next week as we begin on that journey, and we hope you have a great weekend. Until next time, love and peace. Bye for now.